Hey, Stephen, we'll get started in just a few minutes. I'm your host, Lavender.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. So give it another minute and we'll get started. All right.
All right. Is it just me?
You and I. That's right. For 50
Yeah,
minutes.
there you go. Hope people get something out of it.
I'm sure they will. Looking forward to it. All righty. It's 10 o'clock on the dot. I am your host, Lavender Gill. I also host the Script Cake podcast, and I'm excited to have Steve Douglas Craig with us today. Steve, would you give us a few minutes, just a little bit of background on yourself so everyone knows exactly what your background is?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for the introduction. My name's Steve Douglas Craig. I have a heavy background in theatre, but most of all, I'm a graduate of the American Film Institute, their MFA program in screenwriting, and was recruited out of AFI into Sony Pictures Entertainment, where I worked in worldwide acquisitions for about 8 years. After that, I was promoted to a senior story editor and acquisitions marketing specialist with Screen Gems, which is a label of Sony Pictures Entertainment, where I worked for about 5 years until recently, where I left the company. I'm now a co-founder of a company called LitVision Media.
Well, before we get started, I want to make sure to tell our attendees, please add your questions to the Q&A box or to the chat box. We want to get as many of your questions in here as possible. I want to get us started. I want to know, how much of an impact does that background in screenwriting really help you with all the other facets of running your company?
It's the foundation for me. It's as I said, I have a heavy theatre background, so I've always been involved in storytelling since the age of 17, 18 years old. But the idea that a story is generated from a blueprint, especially in film and TV, is where we really start. So understanding story, understanding the structure and formatting and, character development, plot development from a creative standpoint was really important to me. I was in grad school. I had no idea what I was going to do with it. All I knew was that, an MFA program didn't really teach the business of what it is to make a film necessarily. So I was happy to be recruited out of there into the worldwide acquisitions group at Sony, because that really gave me a grounding in, how you can take a screenplay and not just develop it, but learn how to package it, learn how to package a film. What does it take to get a film made? What kind of films get bought? Why do they get bought? So the foundation in storytelling was exceedingly important in understanding, the business of of making a film, buying a film, and what it was to develop and produce a film.
Okay. And a reminder to all our members here, make sure you get your questions in there. So let's talk about packaging, because I think that's a term that everyone in the industry hears. What exactly does that mean in your day-to-day work?
Well, it's something that has changed over the last, I've been, until recently, I was with Sony Pictures Entertainment as a company for nearly 14 years. So I've watched the industry change from, a dependency on theatrical distribution. Back when I started, we were still pressing DVDs, which we don't do as much anymore. So I watched the industry change from that kind of thing into streaming and the evolution of the streaming world. And I think when you're packaging, even when you're writing a movie, you have to think from a marketing perspective and an acquisition perspective. Where does this fit? if you're someone who thinks you've happened upon a completely original idea, you might be a little delusional. Every poet is a thief. But I think packaging itself is something that, has changed as well and evolved. It used to be, and there are still certain divisions of those major studios and networks that get involved in packaging. And what I mean by that is, even at Screen Gems, when I was working there, if we were working on a movie called The Unholy with Sam Raimi, and even at that level, you have to attach actors, you have to attach elements to your project that make it more sellable, that make it more attractive to someone who want to distribute it. So it's not just a script anymore. When the management companies like Anonymous Content, Circle of Confusion, Zero Gravity, a lot of those management houses, the packaging of a project falls back on them now. So before they even come to a distributor like Sony Pictures, they have to have their ducks in a row. It can't just be, here's a great script. Screen Gems works a little differently because they are more of a heavy production and development company. But even at that level, when we do get a script like The Unholy, there was no point taking it to the head of the studio and saying, hey, we're going to make this film. Because he's going to be like, what? No, you're not. It's just a script. We needed to go out with Sam and find a director and find a screenwriter to keep rewriting it, which was Evan Spiliotopoulos, who's just a genius as far as I'm concerned. I've never, in fact, in my 14 years, the first draft of that film was one of the best I've ever seen.
Wow.
But until we get those attachments, and then, Richard Dean Morgan, I always get that name wrong. I always want to say Richard Dean Anderson, but I've got that name.
That shows our age.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible. I stopped watching The Walking Dead. I hope no one's offended by that. But he's a great actor. And when he signed on to the movie, then we had a package, right? Then we can go to the studio and say, hey, Evan is directing it. He's writing it. We've now got Richard attached to it. Please chat if I got that name wrong. I always do. But once we got that done, then we can go to the head of the studio and say, we have a package now. And because we have a built-in distribution line with Sony, we don't have to work as hard. As an independent producer, you do have to work a lot harder when it comes to creating that package, because unless you are, Diablo Cody or Blair Butler or John August or one of those A-list writers, a script is not going to be enough for a distributor or sometimes even a producer, a high-level producer, to look at it. I certainly know it's not enough for a financier. No one's going to give you money for your screenplay, right, to go make it, because it's an investment. They're going to invest in a package. So that's what I mean by packaging, is you do have to make sure that you've got some saleable elements. I will give you an example. A number of years ago, when I was working as a junior in acquisitions, I got a phone call from a producer in New Jersey who had spent $4 million on completing his movie, right? And was now looking for a theatrical distribution, right? And he wanted us to distribute it in cinemas, a wide distribution. And he had, as the star of his film, Mike the Situation Sorrentino from the Jersey Shore.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
Now, we've already spent $4 million on this.
Right.
Where do you want me to release that in cinemas? Because maybe one cinema on the Jersey Shore. Yeah. I don't know. No, so you've really got to consider the packaging of that, because packaging is what will sell to network studios and even the mid-level independents.
No, my first film, we had no famous actors in it. Was a romantic comedy. Mm-hmm. And we got a lot of great reviews. We won a bunch of festivals, and nobody would distribute it because you can't sell a romantic comedy without someone in it. So we have
not unless Netflix pick it up now. True. Romantic comedies have gone the way of streaming to a certain degree.
All right, we got a couple questions here. We filmed a 20-minute TV pilot titled Gotcha. Wrote 5 additional episodes for it, submitted to BET, haven't heard back from them. How can we submit our TV pilot to others, such as Netflix, Hulu, HBO, etc.?
Yeah, that's tricky. One of the things I will say is that TV is a lot more collaborative than film sometimes, the TV environment. Anyone who you're looking to run a show, or if you are a showrunner, I'm not sure if you're a showrunner, if you're looking to attract a showrunner, they're going to want to say in how that pilot is developed, made, and the rest of the season, what it looks like. If you've already written it all, you leave no room for collaboration. That can be a problem.
Okay.
Places like Netflix, even Amazon, most TV networks, I know Sony Pictures TV certainly works that way, is that you don't want to be writing beyond the pilot. Yes, you should have a good solid pitch deck and maybe a slide or two of the outline of what the first season beyond that might look like.
Mm-hmm.
But developing too much ahead of time only tells a showrunner that you're not going to be easy to work with when it comes to changing that story the way they want it. So my suggestion is, if you are interested in TV and you want to sell a pilot, going and making it first is probably not the best way to do it, because you're spending money that you can't be assured of getting back ever. And that's not the way to approach a lot of the streamers. You want to sell them the idea first and the script and show them that you can put a script together.
Mm-hmm.
But even myself, I did a couple of seasons on Hawaii Five-0, and what I did learn from that is that at a very senior level on those shows, it's a very collaborative environment and decisions are made as a collective. So I'm not saying you should scrap it, but at the same time, overdeveloping it in the direction of being too complete with it might work against you.
Okay.
So a lot of streamers like Netflix and Amazon like to develop their own stuff in-house.
Mm-hmm. All right. On the follow up on that question, I noticed that Sundance and a lot of big festivals are now offering submissions for pilot episodes for web series and TV series and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't exist a few years ago. And so what are your thoughts on that option opening up and using those channels for something like this?
Yeah, I think Sundance has a great reputation. The Sundance Screenwriting Lab is a good one. It's a great incubator. But I think the reason you've seen that change is because of the explosion of the streaming world. A lot of TV gets sold to streaming work, to the streaming world. So it makes sense that they're opening the labs up to not just films. It used to be feature films, but opening the labs up to pilots and ideas where they can incubate them. They're not a bad place to go, especially Sundance, because they're very heavily hooked into the industry. There's a lot of cachet there. But at the same time, the reason you're seeing that is because, TV series in general are not just being written for network anymore. There's a lot more places to sell them. Right. The other thing I would say is don't just think domestically. If you're thinking of developing a film or a TV series, think internationally and think diverse, because you give yourself a lot more places to go with that material. People have to start thinking outside, even the studio where I work now, they don't package anything for a domestic audience. They package them for an international audience because, Sony Pictures Entertainment, while it's the last big independent studio, really, its parent is Sony, obviously, but a lot of the other studios are caught up in this big web of parent companies, and we don't have a streaming channel. We have licensing deals with Netflix and Disney. Mm-hmm. So anything that we make that we go, not sure about that theatrically, can be serviced with those deals. So if you are looking to develop a pilot, the Screenwriting Lab is good. I don't know about a lot of others. It's not really my area of expertise. Mm-hmm. I know that a lot of festivals like Austin and those, they do have really good incubators in them, right, that you can take advantage of, and they are very heavily connected to agencies and management companies. So it's not a bad way to go. Again, don't overdevelop it. Write yourself the pilot so we can see that you can write, and then put together a really decent pitch deck, of what the show and the tone and the structure might look like.
I think when people think about their pilots and their shows, Netflix, Hulu, HBO, BET are the big names that pop up. But I was recently at the American Film Market in Santa Monica, and the whole buzz was about AVOD.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about AVOD and what that is and what could be an option for this particular pilot?
Well, it's funny how we come full circle. When Netflix first started, AVOD is advertising based video on demand, right? SVOD is subscription based video on demand. And to give you an example, right, Lifetime, the movie channel, they have two streamings. They have the Lifetime movie channel and Lifetime. Right? Lifetime is an ad-based. It's an ad-based revenue, whereas their subscription-based is all subscription-based revenue, right? Being able to write towards both of those is important. But at the same time, AVOD is something that that most other streaming channels are already engaged in, and that can actually shape what they purchase, a project for. So you're then starting to deal with budgets rather than content. For instance, Netflix is going back to an ad-based subscription service, just like Hulu have been doing forever, just like Freevee is now, the Amazon part where they're going to do ad-based. So there is a revenue stream there that the networks are probably sitting back going, I told you. But they're starting to engage in those varying types of subscriptions. One is you pay higher, right? A higher subscription fee for no ads. And then you have the AVOD, the advertising-based video on demand. And Netflix is getting back into that world now because, not that I know what their books look like, but I'm assuming their debt's probably pretty good. So being able to write towards those is important. And I think that, I don't know if there's a big difference between them right now. You can get all this inside your head as much as possible. Writing the next Stranger Things is everyone wants to do that, but at the same time, the chances of that hitting are like lightning, depending on, what the material is, whether there's any intellectual property, for instance, associated with it. But I think it's more of a budget-based thing, and I think most streaming services are doing it. Tubi is not necessarily doing it, but if you look at their, their style of movie, it's very low budget. They're looking at buying or creating 100 movies a year. So I think it's a budget consideration, but at the same time, the difference between subscription-based and advertising-based, is that if you can write a TV show that appeals to both of those things, let's say you write a movie and it does really well on Lifetime channel internationally, then you're going to get paid more money, right? Then they can service their subscription-based with it after its advertising success. Mm-hmm. So what they're trying to do now is a lot of these streaming services are trying to attract advertising dollars again to their bases, which means they need higher quality shows that will do that. I don't know how HBO Max fits into this. I'm assuming there's going to be a few changes over there soon, but again, I don't know.
All right, well, let's go to the next question. What is your opinion about the continued preference for theatrical release over streaming only deals for indie films, even if it means less money? How does that work for or against a filmmaker's mission to get the film out?
I think as many release platforms as possible is good for any filmmaker. It is difficult. I mean, the pandemic obviously is slowing now, and we're back to work, and it appears the theatrical space is still strong. Has it changed? Yes. I think it's hard for people to predict exactly how this is going to go. You're going to see a lot of streaming services eaten up by bigger ones, for instance. There's going to be a lot of amalgamation and mergers and acquisitions, all kinds of stuff going on over the next 5-6 years, I think. But at the same time, for instance, I believe Sony Pictures Entertainment is still heavily geared towards theatrical distribution. It's where they make good money. It is a lot more speculative when it comes to what they're going to put in the cinema, and I think most studios work that way. You can still make a great deal of money, but you are at a higher risk of losing it if you don't. I mean, Smile is a great example of what the theatrical distribution landscape can look like for specific genres. as I said earlier, the romantic comedy, I don't know. You could put Brad Pitt and Margot Robbie in one of those, probably still not going to make your money back. I don't know. It's risky. But genres like horror are still doing very well. Smile was a $17 million movie put out by Paramount. And because of the creepy marketing campaign that went on for a while, it's now over $200 million, worldwide. So I think that theatrical distribution is still alive. I think, the big superhero movies and the big heavy hitting $150 million movies, if they're released at the right time, will make an impact. One of the things you have to understand with the studio system is that they do sweat specific dates and days to release these movies. That is super important.
Yeah.
And the specialty box office, for instance, do you want to be releasing a specialty box office movie in the summer? No, you don't. You don't want to be up against the studios that way, which is why you see a lot of success of horror movies around this time of year, because this is the award season. This is when a lot of specialty awards movies get put into the landmarks and the regals, so that they will have a theatrical runs, so they can qualify for an Academy Award, and two, because it is the time of year as fall kind of comes, and domestically, where people will go out to the cinemas and see those smaller movies. But and the kids are back at school and all those kind of things. When you're marketing a movie as an independent producer, there's a lot to think about with regards to what is my movie, where does it fit, right? Who is the audience for that? When do they go to the cinemas? And there's a lot for the theatrical marketing teams and the streaming services to think about. But also, unless it's Tom Cruise or someone like that, the day of the movie, in my opinion, the movie star days are over. They're done. The ability for an actor to carry a movie just on their own is becoming a lot harder, and that's why in worldwide acquisitions, when we pick up a movie, we're looking at territories. We don't just buy a movie worldwide if we know that we can't sell it in Latin America or we can't sell it in Scandinavia. We might pick up Latin America and Scandinavia only, if it's starring Stellan Skarsgård or Javier Bardem or Penelope Cruz, something like that. All of those points are considered, and that affects your budgets. So I think theatrical will remain strong. I'm an optimist that way. I still believe Christopher Nolan, people will go and see his movies. But at the same time, the landscape has changed, and I think it's changed for good. I don't know. I think AMC and cinemas around the world will remain strong. I think people will still want to go to IMAX, and the Prime cinemas and the Dolby cinemas, that kind of thing, for the experience of a movie. It's my opinion that the movie-going experience is not just about the movie. It's a family thing. It's a couples thing. It's a romantic thing. And I think if you can look at that again as part of your marketing strategy, then your chances of success are a lot better. And I think that's what studios do. That's what, even independent, really, in tune independent producers do, is they have to consider a project from all those angles. Distributors do it. So, Chris Hemsworth, for instance, another great Australian, he can go and work for any studio he likes as an actor and take down a big paycheck to do it. But his production company has a first look deal with Netflix, right? And a lot of these big A-list actors have that now. Reese Witherspoon sold hers for like $500 million or something recently, so they're not just working as actors anymore. They understand that the industry has changed and they're aligning themselves. Apple as well. Apple is really hard to sell to because they're like, well, we don't really care about the genre as long as it's Tom Hanks or Reese Witherspoon or Guillermo del Toro. You know what I mean? They're not really in the business of picking up too many indie produced movies because they don't have to. Their pockets are hugely deep. So they get to choose what they want and will probably be eventually, in my opinion, keep saying that because, I don't know, it's so unpredictable, but someone like Apple will probably eventually start buying libraries of films, taking companies instead of actually making movies, just to, flesh out their streaming platform. But I think that's, you've really got to look at, if you're going to be a screenwriter and a producer and an indie producer, you've got to look at your material from more than just developing and making a great movie these days, because while it is hard, there are also many different platforms that you can be aiming at. Everyone wants a movie released in the theater, but that's not a way to make money. Only the studios and really, really high-end boutique distributors are making money that way.
Okay. There's a few outliers, like the movie Terrifier 2 is out right now. I think it had a $250,000.
That movie is nuts.
It's crazy.
It's nuts. I loved it, which says something about me probably. But I like how it pushed the envelope. And I think marketing is exceedingly important. I'll go back to Smile. Would Smile have been successful without that crazy campaign of people standing in dugouts at the baseball and just standing there smiling creepily at the camera? It's genius. And I think as an indie producer, you're going to have to come up with that kind of stuff, or hire independent, social media companies and advertising companies that do that sort of thing, in order to get, recognized. I think, you'll see a lot of copycats now, people trying to do that. It won't work. But, it's like when the Blair Witch came out, everyone wanted to do found footage and then, lost some of their money. But I think Terrifier 2 is another one, in that it is very specific. It's targeting a very specific market, but the negative publicity behind that and people just leaving the theater feeling ill, will just draw more people in.
Right.
I want to go in and see if I get sick, that kind of thing. So any publicity is good publicity. I don't know. You have to ask Alec Baldwin that question. But I don't know. I don't know if it will get more extreme for indie producers or not. But there is a way of, the media company that I founded with a couple of my producing partners recently, we're just targeting specific genres. We're going to try and make money from films. So we're doing a lot of third-party financing, getting involved with movies that we know are already well packaged and have distribution, which doesn't help the indie producer too much, but we're also going to get involved in that side a bit as well.
Okay. Another question from an independent standpoint, do you feel packaging works the same for television streaming as well as for films?
It can do. Again, a lot of my background is film. I worked a little bit in TV as a writer, but not as a producer. I don't produce television. It does have a different setup. I think one of the things that I think is different with TV is that if you're someone who's not known, has no credits, and you're developing a TV pilot, you probably need to understand that you're not going to get to run your own show. Just not going to happen. You want a showrunner. You want someone to take an interest. The showrunner of a TV show is a CEO. They do everything. It's not just creative. They do it all. It's not a job I'm ever interested in doing. Horrible job. But there are people out there very good at it. Most of them are represented by management companies. If you have a TV pilot, you have to have a strong sense of where it belongs and who it belongs to. You have to look at who's making shows like yours, what production companies, who are they managed by, and you have to query those places and get your pilot to them and your pitch deck to them. You don't want, and this is what I say with people trying to make it all the time, is you don't want to be ringing managers and agents and asking to talk to them because they don't care about you at all. And they've got enough clients to deal with. I started my career as an assistant at a major studio. And in that whole time, the only, I think it was like I was assistant for 3 or 4 years. Over that time, I only had 2 people call me trying to sell something. that said to me, hey, I've just finished this TV pilot, or I've just finished this film. Would you read it? Tell me what you think. I'm like, me? You want me to read it? Yeah, of course I will. Let me tell you something. You need to empower people, right? Managers and producers and agents, they don't give a shit, right? They've got enough to deal with. But their assistants are going to be the next managers. Their assistants are going to be the next executives. You want to empower those people because they have a lot more to gain from bringing their boss a good script than their boss does just from getting it. So that would be my suggestion is if you do have something, look up who's making stuff like yours, okay? Make sure the script is tight, as tight and polished as possible. You know, I read the first 10 pages of a script. If there are errors in it and it looks like people don't know what they're doing, I put it in the bin or I delete it, right? So have it polished. You just burn bridges if you don't. Do a pitch deck. You know, I always do as a screenwriter anyway, because it shows someone the tone and what you're thinking is visually outside of the script itself. It's just a help. But that's my suggestion, even with movies or TV. Who's making ones like yours? Who's producing them? Who's managing those producers and writers? And then query their assistants.
Well, I think that's great advice. What is your advice to the filmmakers who are making, you know, sub $200,000 features? You know, where do you go? What's the best way to get that out there?
That's a lucrative market, isn't it? Just send it to Tubi. I don't know. I'm not experienced with that budget. My budgets, I'm used to working with 7 to 15 million usually, but that is a streaming budget, unless, you know, my very good friend Ed Sanchez, who I've known for many years now, who did Blair Witch Project. There's been another Blair Witch Project for a while, and I think that at that budget level, you have to be more creative because there are many companies, streaming companies that you can go to try and sell to. I like the American film market because if you can put a package of those films together, there is a company in the UK called Headgear Films, which they do a lot of, you know, it's run by Phil Hunt, great guy. He doesn't invest in America at all. It's like, I'm not interested in that. It's too volatile. But he finances a lot of that kind of, you know, level of movie, low budget, under 250. Again, it depends on the genre, you know. I keep going back to Lifetime only because I think it's fee-based movie making. You're not dependent on red carpet or A-list tantrums or any of that stuff. There's no marketing money. There's no publicity money. You're selling straight to the distributor for a low fee, right? So you might make a movie for $320,000 if it's in line with what Lifetime buy, which you must do your research on, right? If they buy it for their AVOD and their SVOD platforms, you can make $200,000-300,000 on top of that movie, and you're out. You're done, right? That works across Hallmark. Netflix are also getting into that game, but it's genre specific. You know, Lifetime is female driven, thriller, mystery, romance. No swearing, no excessive swearing, no excessive violence, a lot of that stuff. So you've got to research your market. Not everybody will just buy a $150,000 movie just because it's $150,000. It has to be more specific than that. And that's about researching, you know, who's buying what. You know, if you look at Netflix right now, they're in nearly 200 countries. So the global aspect of Netflix is attractive, and each country has its own version of Netflix, and they have local content producers that they have first look deals with. So if you are looking to get into that low budget game, those are the places you can go. I suggest putting a package of them together and going to AFM and festivals and places like that. Those streaming services do send representatives to all the smaller festivals looking for that kind of content. So the festival circuit is still pretty healthy and strong.
All right. How do you feel about the market for satire comedies of a tone ranging from Wes Anderson to Ruben Östlund?
It's not really my thing, but I guess, you know, it's the same. I have the same feelings about it. You know, you got to package it properly. You know, Wes Anderson sells a package because he's Wes Anderson, you know, not just because he does those quirky satire comedies. That is his thing. And people will pay more money for that. I think if a movie is done well, then you will find a home for it. I think quirky, you know, satire comedies are the way of the streaming services. Again, unless you can attach some real A-list talent to it. If you have a good script that you think Wes Anderson would be perfect for, I say aim high. You know, query his production company assistants, query his management. But at the same time, if you're going to make one of those movies, then research who's purchasing them. You know, Netflix does purchase stuff like that. Hulu, not so much. You know, Amazon might. Is it global? How specific it is to an international appeal? Again, there's a lot more to think about than just, I have a satire comedy. You know, I know that Bollywood does a lot of that kind of stuff, but they're not going to buy anything that's not Bollywood, you know. So you have to think internationally as well with that kind of stuff. And, you know, budgets are important as well.
Yeah, satire doesn't travel.
Does not.
It does not. So you're limited.
Seth Rogen. Give it to Seth Rogen, see if he can do it. Or Judd Apatow.
Sure, we'll just call him right up.
Yeah, give him a call. Jonah
So a lot of the people in this panel, I'm going to assume, are of the school that you come up with a great idea, you're passionate for it, you write it, you raise the money, you make it happen. But it seems like the studio doesn't work that way. The studio is much more looking at it from a bird's eye view of where can this go and how can we make money. Did you have those notions when you first started about having that great American screenplay or great British screenplay, if you will, or Australia? Forgive me. And
I'm going to log off now.
Are you in Australia?
I am. I'm not in Australia, but I'm Australian.
All right, fantastic. Their film market is booming. Australia and New Zealand.
They'll make anything.
Really?
Yeah, actually the low budget horror in Australia right now is booming for some reason. You know, no, I've been living here for about 20 years, so I'm American, but I'm originally from there. We are talking to a couple of producers out there about some of their product that they've got coming up. But what was the question again?
The question is, you know, I think that people like myself who make lower budgeted stuff have always looked at it a certain way. But now I'm going to the American film market. I'm going to different places. I'm getting a whole new perspective. You know, the packaging is one part of it, you know, but it's show business. You know, I think people like me focus on the show aspect of it. Whereas I'd say people like you focus on the business aspect of it. So can you tell me about that transition, the difference between, you know, having that, I'm sure you deal with it with a lot of young filmmakers.
Yeah, you know, I did a little teaching at American University here as well. And they, you know, when I teach screenwriting, and I do teach screenwriting, by the way, I will drop my website if people want to contact me.
Oh yeah, what is your website?
My website is thenewscreenwriter.com. I offer all kinds of services there, from a development executive perspective, from you know, full development to studio coverage to script scrubbing, all that kind of stuff. It's not cheap.
I'm sure you're worth
I've given you my experience for nothing. But to answer your question, yes, one of the reasons that when I got out of grad school, I knew that, you know, which was a tremendous experience. If you get a chance to drop, you know, a whole bunch of money and go to AFI, I recommend it. But not everyone gets that chance. And I think one of the things I was sure of is I didn't know anyone, and I didn't know much about the idea of, okay, I've got my script. Apparently now what I'm supposed to do is get a manager. Is that what I'm supposed to do? I don't know. I didn't do that straight away. I fell in love with development anyway. But I think you have to understand why you're writing a screenplay. You're not writing it in isolation so that you can just put it on a shelf. You're writing it because it's meant to be viewed and you're trying to sell it. right? Eventually, which is you want it made into a film, right? But there's no point blowing a couple of $1 million on making the film if you haven't done the research on where it belongs. And we're in a much more competitive environment. However, there has never been a better time to be a content seller, someone who's selling content, providing content. There's a lot of platforms out there. So I think it's fine. I don't have any trouble coming up with ideas as a screenwriter. I have like folders of them, but I still write. I'm working on one right now, a small indie kind of thriller. But I think when you're looking at that, you've got to look at, okay, what is this like? And so while I'm writing a screenplay, I develop the pitch deck as I do it, because I'm always looking up comparative analysis. What is my film like? Was it successful? Where was it successful? How has that changed? So I do bring a marketing aspect to my screenwriting now, but I don't write towards that. You still have to write what you love, right? And I'll give you this example. When I was at grad school, I wrote 2 romantic comedies before I realized I'm not very funny. And I wrote them because the idea that seemed to fit that genre, right? The idea that I developed, I went, well, this is a romantic comedy. I can feel it. But I wrote 2 of them and they were okay. They're not great. In fact, my first 10 were not great. But when I was graduating, the dean of the school, I was talking to the dean of the school, and he said, so your professors said that, you've got talent and that you're hardworking and that you just don't know who you are. Like, what are you talking about? And he said, think of it this way. You go to a cinema complex and there are 18 theaters in the cinema. And each one of those have the best of every genre. Which one do you go and see? Like, well, horror thriller. It's like, then why are you writing romantic comedies? Right? I couldn't give him an answer. I don't know. He said, write what you love. If that's what you want to see, write something that you would want to see on the screen, right? Don't write what you think the industry wants you to write or what you think you can sell, because there'll be no heart in it at all. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't come to your project with a sense of where it belongs, right? I love horror. I've always loved horror. I hate trolling Netflix now because I've seen everything. But that's my suggestion there is you do have to couple it with a sense of, I know what I love to write and I'm really passionate about this project. But before I go out and develop it and make it and throw money at it, that then, will end up in all kinds of divorce because I've taken out second mortgages, right? Do your research on where it belongs, who's buying that material, and whether it's worth actually pursuing that idea from a business perspective. And if not, there might be a stronger idea in another folder you have.
Okay.
But you have to write what you love.
No, I think there's a balance in there because there seem to be 2 different people. I work with a lot of novice screenwriters. I teach screenwriting myself, and I see, 2 different things. One is they write what they think is going to be the next big Hollywood thing,
right,
with no bearing on who they are and what they're passionate about. Or they go the opposite direction and they write something that's just completely personal and has no real commercial viability.
Right. Well, that's what I teach. That's how I teach screenwriting through the newscreenwriter.com is I don't teach just the craft. I teach distribution and I teach acquisition. And so as we're developing their stories, I make them pitch 2 or 3 at the beginning. And then I go, yeah, that's it. Do that one, But then I give reasons why, so as we're developing the screenplay, I'm also advising on where it fits, why it fits that way, and who might be buying that stuff. Because that's what I wish grad school had been, although there was no time to do that in grad school. It would have ended up a 4-year thing. But when I'm teaching screenwriting, I try to teach from that perspective, not just a craft level, but from a business level.
One of the things that I hear a lot from managers and agents and producers when they jump on, on unknown writer's screenplay,
Mhm.
is they love their voice. And, it's a nebulous thing, this thing called a voice. Can you tell me what your version of someone's voice is?
It's sometimes, first of all, agents and managers are not to be trusted. No, that's not true. No, there's some really good ones out there. I've had a couple of good ones over my time. But a voice is just a unique take on something. For instance, when I first met James Wan and Lee Winnell, right, when I helped with the development of the Insidious horror movie franchise, and I was there for the first one. They had already done the Saw movies and all that kind of stuff, and they were still going on, but they had a unique take on an already established genre, and I think Guillermo del Toro and people like that have that. There's a unique take on an already established genre, which means you don't have to look to be completely original. If you take a tired genre and you're able to give it a twist of some kind, and make it, incredible again. Smile has done that. It's just, Quiet Place did that with the horror creature feature. The idea of having to be quiet, so you don't. That was a unique twist on that genre, and that's a unique voice. I think Ari Aster, for instance, who's an alumni of mine, who did Midsommar and Hereditary, a lot of those horror movies. Reading his scripts is like reading a novel, which I don't like, but he's directing his own stuff, so it doesn't matter, right? But he does have a unique voice and a unique twist on that genre. And I think that's what they mean by that. I wrote a TV pilot a number of years ago that my manager sent out to Paradigm, and an agent over there really responded to it, loved it, called me in for a meeting, and wanted to represent the project, right? The project. That doesn't mean me. It's like, I love this. Let's work on it. I'm like, wait, I've got other stuff. I don't care about that. So a lot of people will read that script, which is why I always say to people, don't write your first script and send it to agents, because then they don't care. They're going to read that and go, oh, it's not too bad. What else have you got? Oh, I don't have anything else. Yeah, well, let me know when you do. You want to have 2 or 3 really well-polished pieces in your pocket. So I think that, as far as like the idea that someone is going to rep a project or jump onto a project, they're doing just that. They've discovered a new voice, but they're more interested in the script than they are the actual voice itself. Unless you can have 2 or 3 other pieces of material that they go, oh, this is good too. Oh, wow, I love this too, right? Then they're going to rep you, right? But if they're just excited about a new voice in one script, they're probably more interested in the script.
Yeah,
generally.
All right. Well, I guess we're going to have our last question now, because
it better be good.
50 minutes. Back in the day,
oh my God,
people would get actors like Eric Roberts and so on and so forth in their independent films.
Right.
How do you recommend producers, directors go about packaging their independent films now?
Well, to give you an example, as I happened to exist back in the day, when I first came into Sony Pictures Worldwide Acquisitions, we were still making Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, right? And no one's going to the theater to see that dude. No one, right? But we were still selling over 1 million units in Europe of Jean-Claude Van Damme movies on DVD, right? So we were in that business. Same with Dolph Lundgren. Right? We were still making those movies and selling the units of DVDs. People were just buying them. I think streaming services work the same way a little bit, in that if you can package a movie based around someone who has a really high profile TV presence, for instance, streaming has gone the way of, people who are watching network TV or cable TV are also watching streaming, right? If you can get Emily Deschanel from Bones, right, and you can put her in something, streaming service is going to be really interested in that, right? So look at your A-list TV actors and hand their companies a film. Say, we've got a film here. We think Emily would be perfect for the lead role. Will you read it? Because if you can get someone like that, you're not selling it, it's not getting theatrically released. Just forget it. Emily has no domestic value here and none overseas. However, on streaming, she does, right? Her new series on Netflix is pretty good too. But that's the way to look at it, is that you're not just dealing with, if you can take the blinkers off and stop thinking of theatrical distribution all the time, right? There's just as much, if not more, money to be made as a content provider in the streaming world. You have to be smarter about budgets and your packaging. You look at the big network shows, This Is Us and all of those kind of shows, and you cast their A-list actors in indie movies. Actors want to work, right? They want to work. And believe me, some of these people who do TV series on networks, they can't wait to take a break so they can do a movie. So it's being strategic about, who would suit your role, and don't just look at A-list actors, because they don't need your script. Chris Hemsworth is booked 5 years out from now. Can't get to him, right? He's booked 5 years out from now. Here, Chris loves your movie. Fine, we're going to do it in 2030. Okay. No, you want to get it made before that, probably. So be strategic about where you look for actors and who might have an appeal. They're a great, IMDb Pro is always a great source for that. There is a platform called ePoll, which do a whole graph thing. I don't know if I love it, but our theatrical marketing teams use it to grade how popular someone might be on certain platforms. It's expensive, so don't commit to it unless you've got the investment capital. But Studio System as well is another one. But that's what I would suggest, is that, look at those, don't just look at, A-list actors, look at B-list theatrical distributing, elements, and attach them to your TV show that you want to stream, and form some relationships. The only way that I can now go and do my media fund is because I know everybody. I got to know, one of the other reasons I needed to jump out into a studio was I didn't have any relationships. No one knew who I was. But over that time, I got to meet a lot of producers and agents and managers over that 14 years, to the point now where I can just call them, say, I have money, what do you got? And they'll come to me. So as an indie producer, relationships are exceedingly important. Make them with the people who are producing, distributing, and financing product like yours. You don't need 100, just a few good ones.
Well, thank you, Stephen Douglas Craig. Enlightening, a lot of great information. If you want to reach out, you can get to him at thenewscreenwriter.com. And really appreciate you, and thanks for the great questions. Great talking.
It's a pleasure. Nice meeting you.
All right. Well,
take care.
have a great day. Bye-bye.